There's some pretty disturbing theories out there about what women did for their menstrual cycle in the pre-modern world in the Middle Ages. I have actually heard some people, and hear me out on this, who claim that they free bled. The Kamicha just caught the blood. No, just absolutely not. Anyone who claims that cannot have done it in any kind of experimental context. Right. I don't believe that. Some people say, well, only during their menstrual cycles, they wore a clout, which is basically they put a string around their waist and they ran the string between their legs and they attached a piece of fabric to that. But they only did that during their menstrual cycles. Okay, maybe, but if you do that plus a pair of breeches, that's going to protect your garments a lot more from blood stains. But also, menstrual blood that ends up on your thighs and dries, no, not comfortable at all. Just ew, 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 ew. Some of you may not know, there was a Norse settlement in Greenland starting in the 10th century and running until about the 15th century. They have excavated a bunch of the graves there. They had to because erosion was actually exposing the graves. And one of the bodies they found was a woman, and she had there was a string around her waist, and there was a string between her legs, and there was a piece of moss attached to the string. Moss would be an amazing menstrual pad. Moss is antimicrobial. It's very durable. It's sponge-like. It's very absorbent. And so this would make a great, very cheap, accessible, basically menstrual pad. I've also read about rags, menstrual rags, clouts, basically, linen, made of linen or hemp, invariably, things that can be washed out. They actually appear sometimes in inventories and expense accounts. And they appear in kind of an interesting oblique way. They might be called women's rags, or they're not labeled at all. It's just referred to as a little chest filled with white linen rags. And you're like, yeah, we know what that's for. If it's found, if it's inventoried as being in the ladies' chamber. Depending on where you were and when you were exactly in the Middle Ages, how you handled a menstrual cycle would vary. But I have lots of evidence of women doing something about it that didn't involve free bleeding into their smock. For women, especially with a heavy menstrual cycle, this linen is not going to, your linen smock is not going to be enough to absorb that. It's going to bleed through into your overgarment, and then your overgarment is going to have blood stains. You say that moss and wool were known to be antimicrobial. Did they test several materials to see which doesn't cause an infection? So let me be clear. Moss and wool were not known to be antimicrobial. They are known. Germ theory is not a thing in the Middle Ages. Medieval people understood very well cause and effect. They understood that if they did X, then it had a good or not good outcome. So they didn't necessarily understand about the antimicrobial nature of moss and or wool. Those happen to be properties that would result in good outcomes and therefore lead medieval people to use them more often. I have not seen any studies about using wool or moss specifically for menstrual pads and which ones would be more or less likely to cause infection. I just know that studies have been done in general about the antimicrobial effects overall about moss and wool.